She wasn't looking for anyone that night. I had lived too long to believe in chance encounters. The mafia-linked grandma walked slowly along the cold sidewalk, enveloped in her own silence, when she saw the little girl, small, trembling, huddled against the wall, as if she had already learned that the world doesn't ask permission before it hurts. Anyone else would have walked right past it. Anyone else would have thought, "It's not my problem." But then Grandma stopped, because something was wrong. Not in the crying, not in the cold. On the coat, a simple children's coat, with a detail that only someone from the past would recognize. A hand-stitched flower, a specific thread, a sign that wasn't fashion. It was a message. At that moment, Grandma's heart didn't race. He went back in time. She had seen that before. Decades ago, when women disappeared in silence, and children paid the price. The girl looked up, startled, not knowing who the elegant lady was who was watching her so carefully. And Grandma understood something with frightening clarity. That child was not just lost. She was running away. And when a mafia grandma recognizes a sign like that, she doesn't ask, she protects. Because some women don't grow old to rest. They grow old to prevent history from repeating itself. And it was there, on that icy sidewalk, that the destiny of 2 generations changed forever. The fine snow was beginning to cling to the edges of the sidewalk when Donna Mireia stepped out of the car with the calculated slowness of someone who had lived too long to be in a hurry. She didn't need to run. The world had always run from her. The security guards remained nearby, discreet, and yet the entire street seemed to instinctively move away, as if the air grew heavier when that lady appeared. Mireia was 74 years old, wearing an impeccable dark wool coat, leather gloves, and a gaze that no longer trembled. The city called her Grandma behind the curtains, but those who knew her story called her something else, a survivor. And survivors don't age, they only accumulate silence. She was returning from a short visit, an appointment that wasn't really an appointment. It was an old demand made without raising her voice. The driver opened the door, and Mireia breathed in the icy air as if recognizing winter as part of her own body. That's when she saw the girl, too small, too thin, leaning against the wall of a closed bakery, trembling with her face hidden in her coat. Not just any coat, a dark blue children's coat with a discreet embroidery on the cuff, a white flower sewn by hand, with a gold thread in the center. Mireia stopped mid-step as if the street had pulled her feet to the ground. The security guards noticed the change in her pace immediately. One of them approached, ready to ward off any threat. But Mireia raised her hand, slowly, and he froze, like a trained dog. What made her stop wasn't the child. Lost children exist all over the city. What made her stop was the coat, the white flower with the gold thread. That wasn't ordinary. That was intimate, ancient, a symbol of a past that Mireia swore she would never touch again. The girl didn't lift her face. She was trembling so much it felt like her bones were rattling inside. Mireia approached calmly, the sound of her low heels echoing softly on the floor. She didn't crouch down immediately. Older people know that the body demands every movement. But Mireia also knew that certain situations don't allow for hesitation. "Hey," her voice came out low but firm, like someone calling a frightened bird. The girl shrank back even more. Mireia took a deep breath. "You're cold." It wasn't a question. It was a fact. And facts, in Mireia's life, always came before lies. The girl finally lifted her face, large red eyes, filled with ancient fear. The kind of fear that doesn't spring from a bad afternoon. It springs from a lifetime of frights. Her lips were purplish. Her hair was haphazardly tied back. She looked about 6, maybe 7 years old, and her right hand clutched her coat pocket as if holding a secret inside. Mireia noticed this. She understood everything. She had been young, she had been a mother, she had been a widow, and for a long time she had been a name no one dared pronounce. "What's your name?" Mireia asked. The girl hesitated. She looked around as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. I can't talk." Mireia felt her chest tighten, but didn't show it. "Who said you can't?" The girl lowered her gaze, and the silence was answer enough. Mireia touched the tips of her gloved fingers to the embroidery on the coat cuff, with an absurd delicacy for someone so feared. "Who gave you this?" The girl bit her lip. It was my mother's. Mireia closed her eyes for a moment. The golden thread in the center of the flower seemed to shine under the dim light of the lamppost, as if the past had decided to light up on its own. She straightened up and looked at the nearest security guard. "Bring the blanket from the car." The order came out simply. The man obeyed without hesitation. Mireia looked at the girl again. "You're coming in with me. Now." The girl recoiled, frightened. "I can't." "He said—" Mireia tilted her head. "Who is he?" The girl trembled harder, and her eyes filled with tears. "I can't talk." Mireia didn't insist. Not at that moment, because she knew children speak when their bodies stop fearing. The blanket arrived, and Mireia wrapped the girl in it carefully, without seeming overly affectionate. Excessive affection scares those who have never received it. She held the girl's face in her gloved palm and spoke in a tone that left no room for discussion. "You won't freeze to death on my street." The phrase sounded strange. On my street. But that was exactly it. Mireia didn't just govern a neighborhood. She governed the silence, and the silence had rules. The girl was placed in the back seat of the car, between the blanket and the smell of clean leather. She looked at everything, as if in a dangerous dream. Mireia got in from the other side, keeping enough distance not to suffocate the child, but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. The car started moving. The girl squeezed her coat pocket again. Mireia watched. "What are you holding?" The girl didn't answer. Mireia didn't repeat herself. She simply extended her open hand, calmly offering a choice. After long seconds, the girl took a button from her pocket. It wasn't just any button. It was an old metallic button with an engraved design, a small lion in an attack stance. Mireia felt her stomach clench. It was a symbol of family, of organization, of blood, a symbol Mireia knew better than anyone in that city. And in that instant, she understood with cruel clarity that girl wasn't just lost. She was running from someone who carried the same past Mireia had tried to bury. Mireia looked ahead and said to the driver, without changing her tone, "Change the route, now." The security guard in the front seat turned his face away, alert. "Ms. Mireia," she cut him off with a simple gesture. "We're not going home." The car turned onto another street, narrower, darker. The girl held the button as if it were the only thing that proved she existed. Mireia observed the trembling, the shortness of breath, the inexplicable fear, and for the first time in many years, Mireia felt something that wasn't anger or control or coldness. It was maternal instinct, tainted by war. She placed her hand lightly on the girl's arm, just enough to be felt. "Listen," she said, her voice low and firm like a somber prayer. "You've ended up in the most dangerous and safest place at the same time." The girl's eyes widened. Mireia continued, "If this button belongs to who I think it does, then no one else will touch you, not while I breathe." And the way she said it wasn't an emotional promise. It was a sentence. Outside, a car drove by too slowly, as if observing. Mireia saw it in the reflection of the window. 2 men inside, staring. The girl shrank back. Mireia didn't move. She just stared at the reflection with deadly calm. And in that second, it became clear to whoever was on the other side. The mafia grandma had found something that was now hers. And when Mireia decides that something is hers, the whole city learns not to argue. The car sped through the narrow streets as the city began to close in on the night. Mireia watched the reflection of the lampposts in the window, but her attention was entirely on the girl. It wasn't just the cold. It wasn't just the fear. There was something in that childlike silence that betrayed a flight too long for such small legs. Children who get lost by accident cry loudly. Children who run away learn to disappear. And that girl knew how to disappear. The child's breathing was shallow, too controlled for someone so young. Mireia recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same kind of breathing she herself had learned decades ago, when she was still too young to carry weapons, but old enough to carry secrets. The breathing of someone who learned early that noise attracts pain. Mireia rested her hand on her lap, suppressing an old impulse to embrace. It wasn't a time for grand gestures. It was a time for quiet safety. The car took a sharper turn, and the girl instinctively leaned toward Mireia. It wasn't a request. It was a reflex. Mireya allowed the contact without comment, without looking directly. Childlike trust isn't born from what is said, but from what isn't forced. The smell of gasoline faded. Now there was the smell of stale bread, of residential streets, of homes that still kept lights on behind the curtains. "Do you know where you are?" Mireya asked, breaking the silence with surgical precision. The girl shook her head. "That's good," Mireya said. "It means nobody else knows either." The sentence sounded strange, but it brought a sliver of relief to the child's tense body. Sometimes not knowing where you are is better than knowing exactly who you're running from. The button was still fastened in the girl's hand, as if it were an amulet or a threat. Mireya had known that symbol since before it became famous, before it became a tattoo, before it became a mark. The lion in an attack stance was used only by a specific branch of the organization, a branch that did not forgive desertion, a branch that did not accept mistakes, and above all, a branch that would never let a child escape, unless something had gone very wrong. Mireya felt the weight of that possibility settle on her aging shoulders. Something wrong in that family meant silent war, and silent war always finds women first. Women and children. The mafia grandmother knew this better than any general. She had buried too many wives, visited too many small graves, heard too many stifled cries to ignore the signs. The girl finally spoke, almost in a whisper. "They were fighting." Mireya didn't interrupt. "A lot." The small hand pressed the button even harder. "She told me to run." Mireya closed her eyes for a second. She didn't need to hear the rest. That sentence carried an ending Mireya knew by heart. Women don't tell their children to run for no reason. They do it when they know they won't be able to run with them. "She told you to put that away?" Mireya asked, indicating the button. The girl nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "She said that if anyone saw it, it was dangerous." Mireya took a deep breath. Dangerous was an understatement. It was a walking death sentence, and now it was inside her car. The driver slowed down as they approached a traffic light. Mireya noticed a car stopped across the street. Engine running, 2 men inside. The same ones, maybe others. In her world, difference rarely mattered. Mireya turned her head slightly, just enough to be seen in the reflection. One of the men looked away. The other lingered a second longer. Mireya held his gaze. He swallowed hard. The car sped off before the light turned green. The girl sensed the tension and shrank back. Mireya placed her hand on her leg. Firm, warm, present. "No one is going to take you," she said without raising her voice. "Not today." That sentence wasn't emotional comfort. It was a command, and children sense when an order is genuine. The car pulled into an underground garage that wasn't marked on any public maps. The gate slammed shut behind them with a heavy metallic sound. The girl startled. Mireya immediately said, "No one can hear from outside here." The garage smelled of cold concrete and old oil, a place built to be unseen. Mireya got out first, her knees silently protesting, like old soldiers still obeying orders. The girl hesitated before getting out of the car. Mireya extended her hand, not as a sweet invitation, but as a firm support. The girl gripped it tightly. Cold skin met the warm glove, a contrast that said everything about what had happened in the last few hours of that little life. Inside the elevator, the silence grew heavier. The girl watched the numbers climb as if each floor were a layer of distance from danger. Mireya kept her gaze fixed ahead. She knew this wasn't a simple rescue. It was a matter of taking a stand, and taking a stand, in her world, always comes at a high price. When the door opened, the hallway was empty. Too clean, too silent, a kind of silence that doesn't allow for screams. Mireya led the girl to an apartment that wasn't her main home, a neutral place, safe, forgotten. The lights turned on automatically, revealing old furniture, folded blankets, framed photos of people who were no longer alive. The girl looked around with wide eyes. "Is this your home?" Mireya shook her head. "It's a place where things stop hurting for a while." The girl didn't smile, but she breathed easier. Mireya took a thick blanket and carefully wrapped the child in it, adjusting the fabric as if she had done it hundreds of times before. Blankets hide more than just cold. They hide fear. "You're going to sleep," Mireya said. "Nothing will happen while you sleep." The girl hesitated. "And you?" Mireia sat in the nearby armchair. "I don't go to bed early." It was true. Mireia had been sleeping little ever since the world had taught her that nights are when dangerous decisions are made. As the girl closed her eyes, too exhausted to resist, Mireia watched the child's face slowly relax. The button was still in her hand. Mireia didn't try to remove it. Some things need to stay where they are until the right time. She pulled her old cell phone from her pocket and typed only a short message to a contact that only existed for real emergencies. "Found. Coat with white flower. Lion button. Get everything ready." The answer came too quickly to be a coincidence. "Understood. The whole city will be quiet." Mireia hung up the phone and looked back at the sleeping girl. The cold had left her body, but not the world. Outside, the night still moved. People were still searching. Men were still asking the wrong questions. Mireia crossed her hands in her lap and took a deep breath. The Mafia grandma had made her choice, and when Mireia chose to protect, the past, present, and future were learning to align themselves or to disappear. Dawn progressed slowly within the neutral apartment, as if time had been instructed to move in silence. Mireia remained seated in the armchair, her eyes watchful, while the girl slept curled up under the thick blanket. It wasn't a peaceful sleep. It was a sleep of exhaustion, full of micro-awakenings, interrupted breaths, and small, involuntary movements. Mireia knew that kind of rest. It was the rest of someone who had run too much, for too long, without knowing exactly who they were running from. She didn't touch the child, but maintained a firm presence, like an invisible wall between the past and what might yet come. The lion button remained closed in the girl's hand, even as she slept. Mireia watched it with an almost ritualistic attention. Symbols don't choose children by chance. Someone had placed that object there intentionally, as a warning, as protection, or as a sentence, and Mireia knew that, in families like that, nothing was given without cost. The lion wasn't just an emblem of power. It was a reminder of possession. And now that reminder was under her roof. Shortly before 3 a.m, the old phone vibrated again. Mireia stood slowly, her knees silently complaining, and answered it away from the makeshift room. The voice on the other end was low, respectful, urgent. "Movement has begun." Mireia closed her eyes. "Where?" The answer came curtly. "Bakery on the corner. 2 men asking for a girl. Description matches." Mireia didn't raise her voice. "Clear the tracks. No cameras, no names." On the other end, only a firm yes. The call dropped. The world was beginning to move. Mireia returned to the child and sat down again. The girl's face was more relaxed now, but her hands still trembled occasionally, as if her body hadn't been told it was safe. Mireia ran her hand over her own old necklace, an involuntary habit she'd carried since her youth. She thought about the girl's mother. She thought about the moment that woman chose the coat, sewed on the white flower, hid the button in the pocket, and sent her daughter running. She thought about what had happened after that, and she thought, above all, about how certain stories repeat themselves when no one interrupts the cycle. At dawn, Mireia asked for new clothes, simple, without brands or symbols. She asked for hot food, too sweet for a child who hadn't eaten properly in days. She asked for silence. When the girl woke up, she found an environment different from what she knew. There were no shouts, no doors slamming, no confusing orders. Just a lady sitting at a table drinking tea, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The girl stopped at the door, insecure. Mireia looked up. "Good morning." The word sounded strange, but not threatening. The girl hesitated before answering. "You're still here." It wasn't a question. It was surprise. Mireia nodded. "I'll stay." The girl took 2 steps forward, then stopped. "Will they find me?" Mireia carefully set down the cup. "Not today." The child didn't smile but sat down, her body still tense but less withdrawn. Mireia served the dish slowly, as if teaching someone to eat slowly was part of protecting them. While the girl ate, Mireia observed her every gesture, the way she hid the food in the corner of her mouth before swallowing, as if she feared someone would take the plate away, the way she glanced at the door at every distant noise, the way she asked nothing more than necessary. Children like that don't ask big questions. They learn early on that big answers hurt more. After breakfast, Mireia asked the girl to take a hot bath. She didn't insist. She just left the door open and the towel folded. Respect also protects. When the child returned, dressed in clean clothes, she seemed smaller, less hardened. Mireia noticed the most important detail. The girl had left the button on the table. That was trust. Small, fragile, but real. Mireia picked up the button and placed it inside a dark wooden box, along with other objects that shouldn't be circulating. "This won't stay with you anymore," she said without harshness. The girl nodded. She didn't argue. Perhaps she was tired of carrying things she didn't understand. Mireia locked the box and stored it at the bottom of a drawer that few knew how to open. Later, Mireia received another warning. Confirmed. The man looking for the child is not the father. Mireia felt her stomach clench. And the mother? There was a pause. They haven't responded. That was answer enough. Mireia closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, the decision had already been made. The girl wasn't just a lost child. She was a survivor in the making, and someone was trying to pull her back to a place that didn't allow escape. Mireia called the girl over to the window. She pointed to the street above, distant and safe. "Do you know why I helped you?" The girl nodded. Mireia spoke calmly. "Because I was once a child, whom no one protected." The girl looked at her for the first time with genuine attention. Not fear, attention, Mireia continued. "And because some of us survive, to protect those who come after." At that moment, Mireia wasn't the mafia grandma. She was a woman too old to pretend she didn't see the world as it is. The girl rested her head on the side of the armchair, near Mireia, without actually touching her. A shy gesture. Mireia didn't move. She didn't need to. The space was occupied in the right way. Outside, the city awoke unaware that it had lost a child it would never find again. The men who asked too soon would find too much silence. Mireia watched the sky clear with the serenity of someone who had already won worse wars. She knew that this was far from over. But she also knew something essential. Who gets through the winter with a mafia grandma? It doesn't start shaking again on its own. The afternoon fell heavily on the city, as if the sky had been warned not to draw attention. Mireia watched the movement of the street from behind the thick curtain, assessing not the cars, but the empty spaces between them. Emptiness also speaks, and when it speaks too loudly, it's because someone is looking for what they shouldn't. The girl remained seated on the rug, folding and unfolding the blanket with excessive care, as if any mistake could bring someone back. Mireia noticed the gesture and knew. The fear still lived there. It had only learned to doze off. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't a curt warning. It was a report. Names Mireia knew, surnames that carried dirty stories, routes retraced, orders cancelled. A body found too far away to be a coincidence. Mireia listened to everything without interrupting. When the voice on the other end fell silent, she simply said, "So that's it." She hung up. There was no surprise. There was confirmation. The white flower sewn onto the coat wasn't a memento. It was a signature. Someone had marked that child as their property, and Mireia didn't accept marks on children. She approached the girl with slow steps, sitting down on the floor to be at her level. She didn't smile. She didn't sweeten her voice. Children who have survived harsh environments recognize falsehood before they learn to read. "You'll need to tell me some things," Mireia said. "Not now. When you're ready." The girl nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I'll tell you when you are," she murmured. Mireia replied without hesitation. "I will." Early in the evening, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't an ordinary knock. It was the right code, at the right rhythm. Mireia didn't get up immediately. She waited 2 more seconds, enough time to show who was in charge in that space. When she opened it, she found a middle-aged woman, rigid posture, trained gaze, one of the few who still called Mireia by her old surname. "They're pressing," the woman said. "They're saying the child is theirs." Mireia tilted her head. "Saying isn't proving." The woman nodded. "But they'll try." Mireia closed the door. "Then try." The girl heard voices and cowered. Mireia returned to her and sat down on the floor again. "Listen," she said with calm firmness. "No one enters here without asking, and no one asks twice." The girl took a deep breath, trying to believe. Mireia extended her open hand. She didn't touch, she offered. After a few seconds, the girl touched her fingers to the palm of the mafia grandmother. The contact was quick, almost a test, but it was enough to shift the axis of the entire room. Later, when the city began to turn on its faulty lights, Mireia led the girl to the bathroom again, this time to wash her face and tie her hair up. As she did so, she commented something simple. "Coats tell stories." The girl looked up in the mirror. "My mother said that." Mireia nodded. "She was careful." The girl swallowed hard. "She would sew when she was scared." The silence that followed was too thick to break. Mireia simply adjusted the hair tie and let the sentence remain. Dinner was simple. Hot soup, soft bread, nothing that suggested excess. Mireia ate little, observing the girl eating more than in the morning. A good sign. Bodies only accept food when they believe it won't be taken away later. At some point, the girl asked softly, "Will they hurt you?" Mireia put down her spoon. "They're not crazy." The answer wasn't comfort. It was truth. And for that child, truth was safer than a promise. As night wore on, Mireia put the girl to bed again. This time not in an improvised way, but in a prepared room. Low bed, soft light, door ajar. The girl took a while to lie down. "If I fall asleep," Mireia finished, "I'll stay here." She sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't hold her hand. She didn't sing. She just stayed. Minutes later, the girl's breathing found a new rhythm. Less broken. Outside, a car stopped for too long. Mireia noticed the change in the reflection in the window. She didn't get up. She picked up her phone and made a short call. One sentence, an address. The car drove off before a minute had passed. The city learned quickly when Mireia decided to teach. In the early morning, the girl woke up crying softly, calling for her mother without a voice. Mireia wasn't startled. She didn't run. She simply moved the chair closer to the bed and said, "She told you to run because she loved you." The girl opened her eyes, confused. "She knew." Mireia nodded. "She knew you would survive." The girl cried harder this time. Mireia stayed. She didn't try to fix the pain. Pain also needs space. When the crying subsided, the girl spoke for the first time something that hadn't been asked. The man who fought with her. He had the same button. Mireia felt her whole body stiffen inside. That closed the circle. The lion. The possession. The violence disguised as family. Mireia took a deep breath. "Then he won't come near you." It wasn't a promise. It was closure. At dawn, Mireia made a decision that didn't involve weapons, money, or threats. It involved identity. She called the woman from the previous night and said, "Prepare documents." On the other end, silence. "New name," Mireia finished. "New story." The woman understood. She always understood. Because changing a name is more effective than erasing an enemy. The girl woke to the sound of the distant city. She didn't ask where she was. She didn't ask how long she would stay. She just sat up in bed and said, "It's less cold today." Mireia smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly. Winter hadn't gone away, but someone had learned to get through it together. And in that forgotten apartment, untouched by maps, the Mafia grandma was consolidating something that cannot be undone by gunshots or threats. She was rewriting a destiny. The documents arrived 2 days later, inside a folder too simple to hold something so definitive. Mireia opened it calmly, as if she had done this before, because she had. A new name, a new birth date, a new timeline, carefully stitched together to hide the old one. The girl watched from a distance, sitting on the sofa, hugging the blanket as if she still needed protection from the wind that no longer entered there. Mireia closed the folder and placed it on the table. "This doesn't erase what you've lived through," she said, "but it prevents them from finding it." The girl nodded. She had already learned that erasing was impossible. Surviving, yes. The city reacted quickly to the invisible change. Questions stopped being asked. Familiar faces disappeared from the wrong corners. A bar closed without explanation. A man changed countries in too much of a hurry. None of this made the newspapers. It didn't need to. Silence was the official statement when Mireia decided to close a matter. And that matter was closed. At least from the outside. Inside the apartment, life began to reorganize itself in a strange and delicate way. The girl started sleeping through the night. She still woke up startled sometimes. But now she called for Mireia. Not for her mother. Not for the past. This broke something in the heart of the Mafia grandmother. But she never let it show. Children need solid ground, not broken adults. Mireia remained whole for them. One morning, while adjusting her dark blue coat on the chair, Mireia noticed the girl observing the white flower embroidery with unusual attention. "Do you sew?" Mireia asked. The girl hesitated. "My mother tried to teach me." Mireia nodded. "Then let's continue." She took an old box from the closet. Inside, threads, needles, scraps of fabric, simple things that don't make a sound. And in that small gesture, Mireia was passing on something that no criminal organization can control: female continuity. The first attempt was clumsy. The second, better. The third, almost right. Mireia watched in silence, correcting only when necessary. The girl relaxed as she sewed, as if each stitch anchored her body to the present. The past became quiet in those moments. Mireia knew. Busy hands calm memories that screamed too loudly. That night, Mireia received a visit from an old man, one who had been a chief, a soldier, and a jailer. He looked at the girl from a distance and understood everything without explanation. "You bought a war," he said. Mireia replied without looking up. "No, I ended one." The man didn't insist. Intelligent people know when a territory has been definitively claimed. The girl overheard a part of the conversation and then asked, "Are they still afraid of you?" Mireia thought before answering. "No," she said. "They're afraid of what I protect." The answer wasn't arrogance. It was the truth. And for that child, it made perfect sense. The fear had shifted sides. As the weeks passed, the coat ceased to be armor and became merely clothing. The white flower remained, but now it no longer betrayed escape. It spoke of origin. The girl walked through the house with less excessive caution, spoke more, asked more questions. Sometimes she laughed, a short, restrained but genuine laugh. Mireia observed everything with the attention of someone who knows that happiness, when it is born late, needs to be protected from excess as much as from lack. One night, while the girl slept, Mireia was alone in the room, holding the lion button between her fingers. The cold metal seemed less threatening now, still dangerous, but controlled. She opened the window and threw the button into the river that cut through the city. Not as a challenge, as closure. Some marks need to disappear so that others can exist. The next day, the girl noticed the absence. "The button?" Mireia replied calmly. "It doesn't control anyone anymore." The girl nodded. She didn't ask anything else. Children know when something has truly been resolved. Months later, when winter returned, the girl didn't tremble. She walked beside Mireia down the street, holding tightly to her grandmother's gloved hand. People stared but dared not comment. Some recognized Mireia. Others simply felt that this pair should not be interrupted. Instinct can learn too. As they passed the same bakery where it all began, the girl stopped. She looked at the empty window and then at Mireia. "It was here." Mireia nodded. "And now," the girl thought, "now I know where to go." Mireia squeezed her hand lightly. Nothing more needed to be said. That night, while the city slept, Mireia watched the girl fall asleep, with a book in her lap and a thread of yarn escaping from her pocket. The past hadn't been erased, but it had been traversed, and that was the most someone like Mireia could offer the world, because some women don't save lives by shouting. They save lives through silence, perseverance, and decisiveness. And when a mobster grandma decides to love, even fate learns to obey. Time passed without asking permission, as it always does. The city continued moving, changing its face, exchanging street names and corner owners. But some stories don't dissolve with time. They simply settle in silence. Mireia knew this. She watched from the window as the girl, now a little taller, walked through the apartment with firm steps, without the exaggerated caution of before. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. The blue coat was still there, carefully folded at the back of the closet. It was no longer needed to keep warm, but it remained as a reminder of a winter that had almost been overcome. The white flower, sewn on with small, steady hands, remained intact. Now it didn't signify escape. It represented roots. Mireia believed that some marks shouldn't be erased, only given new meaning. On a quiet afternoon, the girl asked something too simple to carry so much weight. "Have you always been like this?" Mireia understood what "like this" meant. Strong, feared, unwavering. She thought for a few seconds before answering. "No," she said. "I learned." The girl nodded. as if saving that phrase for the future. Learning to be strong was different from being born that way. That made all the difference. People still whispered when they saw Mireia walk by. Some called her Grandma, with veiled irony, others with silent respect. Mireia didn't correct anyone. Titles never mattered much. What mattered was what she protected, and what she was willing to destroy, if anyone dared touch it. One night, while they were sewing together, the girl asked if she could learn to make coats. For when someone is cold, she said. Mireia felt a pang in her chest, but maintained a firm tone. You can learn whatever you want. The needle passed through the fabric, steady. Each stitch was a conscious choice to continue. The past tried to return only once. An old name circulated incorrectly. A poorly placed rumor. Mireia resolved it without leaving home. Some doors closed, some tongues fell silent. The girl knew nothing. She didn't need to know. True protection doesn't expose danger. It neutralizes it. Over time, the girl began to laugh louder. Not always, not everywhere. But she laughed, and that was enough. Mireia watched in silence, knowing that sound wouldn't have existed if she had hesitated that cold night. Some decisions don't save the world. They save one person, and that's all that matters. On an ordinary morning as they went out together, the girl held Mireia's hand naturally. Not out of fear, by choice. Mireia squeezed lightly, the minimal gesture carrying decades of female survival. They walked without haste, as if they owed nothing to anyone. And if someone observed closely enough, they would realize that it wasn't the child who was being protected, it was the future. Because when a mafia grandma decides to break the cycle, she doesn't make any noise. She changes destinies. What almost no one knew about Mireia was that she wasn't born powerful. The power came later, as an unwanted consequence of survival. Before the respected name, before the obedient silence of the city, before being called Grandma by those who didn't dare call her by her real surname, Mireia had been just a young woman trying not to disappear into a world that swallowed women like her without leaving a trace. In her youth, Mireia had also experienced the cold, not of winter, of abandonment. She had learned early on that poorly distributed affection creates dependency, and dependency kills. That was why, when she saw the girl trembling on the sidewalk, she didn't run to hug her. She recognized that kind of fear, the same fear that teaches you to survive, and exacts its price later. The mistake that nearly destroyed Mireia in the past had been trusting a man who used symbols as promises. The same lion, the same idea of belonging. He said he would protect her, but protection that demands absolute silence is never protection. It's control. Mireia had learned this too late. When she managed to leave, she had already buried things she never told anyone, not even herself. Therefore, when the button appeared in the girl's hands, Mireia saw not only danger, she saw repetition. And nothing infuriates an old woman more than realizing that the world insists on committing the same crimes against young girls. While the child slept in the next room, Mireia spent her nights awake not out of fear, but out of calculation. She knew that the man behind that symbol would not accept the loss in silence. Not out of love for the child. Men like him don't love like that. But out of wounded pride. Losing control is unacceptable. Even more so for someone accustomed to possessing people as an extension of his own name. And the problem wasn't just him. The problem was what he represented. That arm of the organization had its own rules, older, more cruel, less visible. They didn't come with bullets. They came with rumors, infiltrations, forged documents, bribed social workers, fabricated accusations. A clean attack, almost respectable. Mireia knew this game. She had played it before, and won, at the cost of parts of herself that never regenerated. Protecting the girl meant reopening doors that Mireia had locked decades ago. It meant becoming a target again, not a legend. It meant putting her own name back on the table, where knives still bore its shape. And yet, she did not hesitate. What the girl didn't know, and didn't need to know, was that, by choosing to stay, Mireia was accepting a silent war. Not a street war, but a war of identity. Who would that child be in the world? Who would have the right to claim her? Who would win the narrative? Because in the end it all comes down to the narrative. That week, Mireia cancelled 2 long-standing commitments. One involved too much money to ignore. The other was an agreement that had kept dangerous men at bay for years. She cancelled both without explanation. Those who received the news understood the message. Something bigger was at stake. The girl began to realize that the house was becoming quieter. Not out of peace, but out of restraint. People stopped visiting. Phone calls decreased. Mireia was cleaning the surroundings, isolating the territory, creating an invisible perimeter around that new life. On one particular night, Mireia sat before the girl and told her a truth. Not the whole truth, but the necessary one. She said that some people don't like it when something gets out of their control. She said that sometimes protecting means changing your name, your place, your story. The girl listened in silence and asked something Mireia didn't expect. "Have you changed too?" Mireia held her gaze for a long second. Then she replied, "Often." The girl nodded, not out of fear, out of understanding. Children who survive too young understand that identity is not fixed, it is constructed. It was at that moment that Mireia realized something dangerous and definitive. She wasn't just protecting that girl. She was becoming the last obstacle between the child and an entire system that would rather see her invisible, obedient, or dead. And Mireia was never good at getting out of the way. It was designed to interrupt. Long before she was called Grandma, Mireia learned that the world doesn't respect women who ask for help. She was just over 20 when she realized that survival didn't come from physical strength, but from the ability to remain standing after everything crumbles. Back then, winter wasn't about snow. It was about hunger, about closed doors, about averted glances when she needed to stay. And it was in that cold that Mireia began to learn to negotiate with silence. She entered that world not out of ambition, but out of necessity. She needed protection for someone smaller than herself, someone who hadn't had time to grow up. The mistake was believing that protection offered by armed men came without cost. It did. It always does. Mireia paid with obedience first, then with silence, and finally with choices that distanced her from everything that made her ordinary. When she realized it, she was no longer just someone under protection. She was someone useful. The lion first appeared in a ring. An older man, low voice, measured promises. He spoke of family as one speaks of property. He said Mireia had a cool head. He said women like that don't survive. They dominate. Mireia listened without smiling. She knew that compliments in that environment were dangerous invitations. Still, she accepted, because refusing meant being alone again, and Mireia had already learned the price of that. The first loss came too soon. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a warning ignored, a name forgotten, a door opened at the wrong time. Mireia spent the entire night sitting on the cold floor of a hospital, with blood that wasn't hers on her hands. No one apologized. No one explained. They just said that's how it was. It was then that something closed inside her. Not her heart. The risk. Mireia decided she would never again depend on anyone's mercy. Over time, she began to rise. Not through force, but through consistency. She never shouted. She never threatened excessively. She observed. She guarded. She waited. More impulsive men fell around her like poorly placed pieces. Mireia remained. When the lion ceased to be a symbol and became a structure, she was already too deeply involved to leave without leaving scars on others. And she did. Motherhood came as an accident, brief and intense. Mireia didn't have time to learn how to be a mother. She had to learn to protect on the go. The world didn't allow for gentleness, only quick decisions. The child spent little time in her arms. Mireia rarely spoke of it, not because it hurt too much, but because it hurt in the wrong way, like something interrupted without the right to say goodbye. It was after that she became harder, not cold, precise. The mistake that almost killed her came when she tried to leave. A poorly negotiated agreement, a favor demanded too soon. Mireia was betrayed by someone she had taught how to survive. The lion became her sentence. She fled that night with only a thick coat, false documents, and the certainty that she would never be naive again. She spent months invisible. She learned to truly disappear. When she returned, she didn't come asking for space. She came occupying it. It was there that the name Mireia ceased to be just a name. It became a boundary. People learned not to cross it. Not out of irrational fear, but because of history. Mireia didn't destroy on impulse. She destroyed out of necessity. And she never repeated the act. This made her unpredictable, and therefore respected. Decades passed like this. Her body aged. Her gaze did not. Mireia accumulated agreements, silent territories, debts that didn't need to be collected. She became what people call grandma, when they want to downplay danger without facing it head-on. She accepted the title. Underestimation is a powerful weapon. Therefore, when she saw the girl trembling on that sidewalk, Mireia didn't just see a child. She saw herself in another timeline. She saw the exact point where everything could repeat itself or be interrupted. The hand-stitched white flower was the same one she herself had made decades ago, when she still believed that small gestures were enough to change destinies. The golden thread in the center was new, a modern detail, an adapted signature. The lion's button closed the cycle, not as a threat, but as a reminder. It wasn't just a symbol of the organization. It was a personal warning. Someone was repeating the same pattern, using women as shields, children as possessions. Mireia recognized the scent of tragedy before it fully manifested. Protecting the girl meant confronting ghosts that Mireia had learned to keep dormant. It meant acknowledging that despite everything, she still cared, and caring had always been the greatest risk, the only one that power cannot neutralize. That night, sitting alone in the room, Mireia touched the old necklace and thought about everything she had lost to become who she was. She thought about what she could still lose if she continued. The calculation was quick, cold, and definitive. She had already lost too much to back down now. What if the past insisted on returning through the hand of a child? So, Mireia would do what she always did best. Don't run away. Face it. The confrontation didn't begin with gunshots. It began with too much silence in the wrong places. Mireia noticed it before any formal warning, before any unexpected phone call. Cafes closing early, a pharmacy changing owners without announcement, a new doorman who asked nothing but observed too much. The city was being redesigned around her, like a chessboard where pieces move, without anyone admitting to playing. Mireia didn't react immediately. Waiting had always been one of her most effective weapons. Those who rush reveal their intentions. Those who observe pick up on weaknesses. She kept the routine intact, took the girl for walks at varying times, never repeated routes, never over-explained. True protection doesn't create patterns that are easy to map. The first message came through a woman. Always women first. A social worker appeared at the building's door with a practiced smile and generic documents. She spoke of anonymous complaints, of children in irregular situations, of protocols. Mireia listened attentively and politely. She didn't raise her voice. She only asked for the woman's full name. The social worker hesitated for a split second. That was enough. Mireia smiled slightly. The next day, the woman requested a transfer. She never brought up the subject again. The second move was more aggressive, yet still silent. An old lawyer who owed Mireia favors from before she grew old called in the middle of the night. He said there was an attempt at legal recognition of guardianship, a male name, no proven kinship, with connections too dangerous to be a coincidence. Mireia hung up without thanking him. Gratitude creates dependence. Dependence creates loopholes. She knew exactly who was pulling the strings. The same man from the past, older now, more cautious, less impulsive. Men like that don't want the child. They want the symbol. They want to prove that nothing escapes their control, that even Mireia could still be tested. That night, Mireia opened the wooden box where she kept things that no longer belonged to the present. Old photographs, a ring, a name handwritten on yellowed paper, and the lion's button, the last physical link to that world. She didn't touch it. She only confirmed that it was still there. Sometimes knowing where the enemy is more important than attacking them. The girl sensed the change in the air. Children feel before they understand. She asked if anyone was angry. Mireia answered with the necessary truth. They're curious. The girl nodded as if understanding that curiosity can also hurt. Mireia reinforced the routine, sewed with her, cooked simple dishes, kept the house alive. Silent confrontation demands well-staged normalcy. The third message came without intermediaries. A car parked across the street for too long. Tinted windows, engine running. Mireia watched from the window for a full 5 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and made a short call. No threat, no explicit order, just precise information. The car left before sunset. That's when Mireia decided that reacting wasn't enough. It was time to bring the story to a close. She made an appointment, not with the man, with the past. An old, unfashionable restaurant, where no one paid attention to the tables in the back. She arrived alone, no visible escort. The other party was already there. The Lion Man had aged badly, his body heavier, his gaze still sharp. He smiled when he saw her, like someone who rediscovers something they believe still belongs to them. "You always liked to show up when everything was calm," he said. Mireia sat without answering. "The child," he continued. "She's not yours." Mireia stared at him with an almost offensive calmness. "Not everything you touch is yours," she replied. The silence that followed was more violent than any scream. He tried to talk about rights, old agreements, broken loyalties. Mireia let him. When he finished, she simply said, "You've already lost." He laughed. "You think you're still in charge?" Mireia tilted her head. "No, I choose," she explained with the precision of someone who had already calculated all the possible outcomes, that his name was surrounded, not by police, by silence, by closed doors, by deals that wouldn't be renewed, by weary allies. She explained that touching that child wouldn't bring open war. It would bring something worse, isolation, oblivion, and men like him don't survive oblivion. He tried to threaten her. Mireia didn't react. She simply placed an old photograph on the table, a single one. He recognized it immediately. The smile faded. This wasn't blackmail. It was closure. Mireia stood up. "You're not going to look for her," she said, "because if you do, nobody will remember you afterward." She left without looking back. That night she returned home and found the girl asleep, with an open book on her chest. Mireia sat beside her, watching her calm breathing, her face finally free of tension. The confrontation had ended without bloodshed, the way it should always end, the way only women like Mireia know how to handle it. Because the most dangerous power is not the one that destroys, it's what determines when something ceases to exist. And in that city, in that story, in that winter that was beginning to recede, the past had just lost its last chance. After the encounter, the city didn't celebrate. Cities don't celebrate. When the danger passes, they just breathe easier. Mireia felt it in the details. The phone that didn't ring, the elevator that started working again without strange noise, the neighbor who greeted her without haste. The silent confrontation had ended in the only way possible for someone like her, without witnesses, without competing versions. Even so, Mireia didn't relax. Those who have survived for too long know that true victories require prolonged vigilance. She maintained her routine but changed the pace. Fewer nights out, more mornings, fewer old gatherings, more domestic presence. The protection was now structural, not reactive. The girl sensed it. Children feel when the world stops vibrating with danger. Days passed and something new happened. The girl began to ask about the future. Not big questions, possible questions. School, a room with light-colored walls, a small dog that wouldn't make noise. Mireia answered without promising what she couldn't control, but without cutting off dreams. She had learned the hard way that denying the future creates ghosts, and ghosts return. One afternoon, Mireia took the girl to a discreet workshop, far from the well-trodden paths. An elderly woman had been teaching sewing there since before Mireia grew old. She didn't ask for names. She didn't ask for documents. She simply observed the small hands carefully holding the needle. "She learns quickly," she said. Mireia nodded. "Pride is dangerous. Recognition is not." The past tried to whisper once more, not with threat, but with nostalgia. An old invitation reappeared. A reconciliation dinner. Mireia refused without comment. Reconciling with someone who never asked for forgiveness is reopening wounds. She knew it. She closed the door from the inside. The girl began sleeping with the door closed. A small sign, a huge victory. Sleeping with the door closed is trusting that no one will enter. Mireia watched from the living room, silently, holding her teacup firmly in her hands. The body ages. Vigilance does not. One night, the girl asked about the white flower. Mireia told her only what was necessary, that flowers survive the cold when they are sown with patience. She didn't speak of blood. She didn't speak of loss. Stories have a right age to be told, and that one wasn't yet. Winter had eased. The streets had become brighter. Mireia walked with the girl along the same sidewalk where it had all begun. The bakery remained closed. The lamppost, the same. The ground, the same. The girl didn't tremble. Mireia didn't look back. Some crossings only make sense when they are not revisited. A final message arrived. Indirect, almost respectful. An old ally informed her that the Lion Man had left the city. Not out of immediate fear, but because it was impossible. When doors don't open, even the proudest learn to leave. Mireia thanked him silently. Silence is a powerful currency. At home, Mireia opened the wooden box one last time, not to delve into the past, but to decide its fate. He separated what was evidence, what was memory, and what was trash. He closed the lid calmly. He stored the box where no one would look. What is not remembered loses its power. The girl returned from the workshop with a new piece of fabric, light blue. "It's for a coat," she said. Mireia observed. "For whom?" The girl thought. "For whoever gets cold." Mireia nodded. The cycle had been broken. The symbol was now a choice, not a brand. That evening they sat together at the table. There were no speeches, just simple food, short conversations, restrained laughter. Normality is the most sophisticated form of victory. Mireia knew this better than anyone. Before going to sleep, the girl said something small and definitive. "This is home." Mireia responded with a slight nod. Homes don't need declarations, they need permanence. And while the city continued to ignore what it couldn't understand, Mireia solidified what she always did best when the noise subsided, to transform survival into destiny. Time didn't ask permission to pass, but it didn't take everything with it either. Some things remained. The smell of new thread mixed with hot tea on cold mornings, the sound of small footsteps unhurriedly crossing the house, and the silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of stability. Mireia recognized this silence as a rare achievement, one that doesn't announce itself. The city continued to feign normalcy. It changed shop windows, replaced mayors, erased stories it never wanted to tell. Mireia observed everything from afar, as someone who already understood that the world prefers to forget women it couldn't control. This didn't bother her. Invisibility had always been an effective form of protection. The girl grew a little, not just in height, but in posture. She walked with less exaggerated caution, spoke with more confidence, slept through the night. There were still broken dreams, still sudden frights, but now there was something new, returning. She would wake up and come back, always come back. That, for Mireia, was everything. The blue coat was put away, not out of rejection, but out of respect. It was a carefully folded memory, ready to be revisited when the time was right. The white flower, sewn with small hands, gained a sister, another flower, different, chosen by the girl herself. Not repetition, continuity. Mireia never told everything. She never needed to. She had learned that complete stories weigh too heavily on the wrong shoulders. What mattered was what was being built now. A simple daily life, a possible future, a late childhood, but still a valuable one. Some people still whispered when they saw Mireia pass by. The word grandma was loaded with irony for some, reverence for others. Mireia accepted them all. Titles don't change who someone is when they close the front door. And there, she was simply a presence. The past tried to return in the form of a loose memory, an old face in a forgotten photograph, a name whispered in the wrong place. Mireia didn't react. The past, when not fed, weakens, and she had learned the right hunger for each thing. The girl once asked Mireia if she was afraid. The question came without context, without drama. Mireia thought before answering. "I used to be," she said. "Now I'm careful." The girl kept the answer to herself, as someone who understands that growing up also means learning to change the name of what one feels. There was an afternoon when they sewed together for hours. Neither spoke much. Their hands worked. The threads met. Stitch by stitch, something took shape. It wasn't just fabric. It was time being mended. Mireia watched the girl's hands and saw in them something the world had almost ripped away. Choice. The ability to decide who to become. After all, that justified every risk taken, every closed door, every imposed silence. At night, when the house was asleep, Mireia would sometimes stay awake, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. I would look out the window and think of all the women who didn't get a second chance. I thought of them without guilt. I thought of them with commitment. The girl there was proof enough that something had been interrupted in time. The Lion Man became a distant rumor. Then, nothing. And nothing was the best way to end things. Mireia knew that some enemies need to disappear without a stage. That way, they leave no heirs. The girl started calling the place home without rehearsing. She didn't ask if she could. She just did. Mireia heard and didn't correct her. Homes are built when someone decides to stay. Over time, small plans emerged. A room with more light. A school where no one asked wrong questions. A quiet dog that slept at the foot of the bed. Mireia didn't promise everything, but she didn't forbid anything. To forbid the future is to repeat past violence. On a clear morning as they crossed the street together, the girl held Mireia's hand out of habit, not fear. Mireia squeezed gently. Small gestures sustain great destinies. The city passed by them without noticing, and that was perfect. What is truly protected doesn't need to be seen. Mireia opened the wooden box one last time. She separated what still had a function from what no longer had power. She let the rest go, not in defiance, but in closure. What no longer weighs anything can break. That night, the girl fell asleep with an open book in her lap. Mireia carefully covered her shoulders and turned off the light. She didn't stay there. She didn't need to. Trust also means knowing when to leave the room. Before going to bed, Mireia ran her hand over the old necklace and smiled slightly. Not out of nostalgia, out of coherence. She had become exactly who she needed to be, at the right time. The world didn't change because of that, but one life changed, and that's enough, because some women don't save the world. They save what the world would otherwise discard. And when a mafia grandma decides to break the cycle, there is no noise left. There is plenty of future. If this story has reached you, don't let it end in silence. I want you to stop for a moment and think, which part of this story touched on something you recognized in yourself? Was it Mireia's silent solitude? Was it the way she protects without shouting, without explaining herself, without asking permission? Or was it the girl, trying to learn to trust again after so much cold and fear? Tell us about it in the comments. You don't need to write beautifully. Write true. Now tell me something else that's very important. Where are you hearing this story from? City, state, or country? Here every comment becomes a meeting point. If this story reminded you of someone, a grandmother, a mother, or even yourself, tag that person or share this video with them. And take the opportunity to become part of this community. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Here you won't find shallow stories. Here you'll find women who survived and decided to protect. Also reply to someone else's comment. Say, I felt that too. Because when women recognize each other, no story remains isolated. Now tell me, what part of this story stayed with you after the video ended? And where are you watching from? I read everything, and I'll see you in the next story of the Mafia Grandmas series.